Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Bible study. You'll notice I'm in a little bit of a different situation here. I'm not at church, I'm at my classroom. Either way, I needed to have some decent lighting and a whiteboard and quiet, and so here we are. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Last week, we started with Numbers, and we started with chapter 1. And just as a kind of a recap here, we have the idea that we're trying to convey still is chapters 1 through 4 here is what we have as God is a God of order and preparation, and we would do well to follow this order. Secondly, we're going to take a look at Numbers 1 through 449, and we already took a look at chapter 1. The outline was order of inventory, which was chapter 1, followed by order of encampment, which is chapter 2, and that's what we're going to look at today. And 3, order of ministry, which is chapter 3, verses 4, and then chapter 3 and 4, basically. So order of inventory, we looked at the map and kind of where they went and so forth. We looked at the promised land and what the promised land was. And then we talked about the tribes and any significance to the guys who were in the tribes and why did they take a census. And it seemed like it was taking a long time. And so we took a look at some of the tribes again. And how it was a lot of Israelites. And then I showed a little video on this idea of exponential growth. And so we finished up with where Joseph went. And remember that where Joseph went was that his name in the 12 tribes of Israel was actually split into 2 parts. And Levi also appears to be missing. And so with Joseph, what happened is his 2 sons that he had in Egypt, and when Jacob met them, with Ephraim and Manasseh, that those 2 kind of took over for his name, with Manasseh being the older. But interestingly, Abraham, wrong generation. Jacob blessed Ephraim more than Manasseh. He was like the first. He got the major blessing, and that kind of perturbed Joseph a little bit, but Jacob knew what he was doing because he was actually prophesying. And it turns out that when we did the census, when Moses did the census in this chapter, that turned out that Ephraim, the younger, actually had more people than Manasseh. So that's kind of where we left off. So then we get to order of encampment, and the order of encampment says this. This is chapter 2. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. The Israelites are to camp under their respective banners beside the flags of their ancestral houses. They are to camp around the tent of meeting at a distance from it. And I'm sorry, get a little distracted there. Judah's military divisions will camp on the east side toward the sunrise under their banner. The leader of the descendants of Judah is Nahshon, son of Amminadab. His military division numbers 74,600. Tribe of Issachar will camp next to it, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's so we have Judah, and we have Issachar, and we have Zebulun, all under the banner of Judah's encampment. And we'll talk about these banners here in a bit. Then in verse 10, we have Reuben's military divisions will camp on the south side under their banner. The leader of the Reubenites is Elizur, son of Shadur. And so underneath Reuben's military divisions, under his banner on the south side, you also have the tribe of Simeon and the tribe of Gad. Then says the tent of meeting, that's the tabernacle, is to move out with the Levites' camp, which is in the middle of the camps. They're to move out just as they camp, each in his place with their banners. And that was verse 17. And then verse 18, Ephraim's military divisions will camp on the west side under their banner. So underneath Ephraim's banner will be Ephraim's tribe and Manasseh, and also Benjamin. So interestingly, those three are paired together. In other words, Joseph and Benjamin are paired together. And then we go to the final side, Dan, under the banner of Dan, which is verse 25. Dan's military divisions will camp on the north side under their banner, and Dan's tribes underneath Dan's banners will include Asher and Naphtali. And so then verse 32 says, these are the Israelites registered by their ancestral houses. The total number of the camps by the military divisions is 603,550, but the Levites were not registered among the Israelites, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The Israelites did everything the Lord commanded Moses. They camped by their banners in this way and moved out in the same way, each man by his clan and by his ancestral house. So what chapter 2 does is it records the details of the positioning of the tribes while they were encamped and while they were on the march. So for the encampment, the locations were identified by the directions east, south, west, and north, with the tabernacle in the very center. And the order of marching was identified by the sequence as listed in the account. And so, in other words, the order must be kept at all times. All right, and that was the main thing. Just kind of a commentary on this: a mass of people unordered invites confusion and riot. And here's a really neat parallel. Jesus honored order when he prepared to feed over 5,000 people at one time. He commanded them to sit down by companies upon the green grass, and they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s. So that same kind of parallel. This is in Mark 6, verses 39 and 40. So how much more need for order and efficiency with over 2 million Israelites in the wilderness, right? So like I said, here in this situation, I want to kind of look at things in terms of questions. And so this question here is, where's God in all this process? Well, God is a God of order. Here, before Israel can take the promised land, he requires that they order themselves also. Not only is this more efficient and useful, but it is also simply more like God. It's more ordered and more organized. And there's a limit to what we can do without order and organization for the Lord. It isn't that order and organization are requirements for progress in the Christian life, but they are progress in the Christian life, and they help us to become more like the Lord. God's a God of order, not of chaos. And so orderliness is a form of godliness, I guess, if you will. I'm preaching to myself in that case, I'll tell you. Nothing is accomplished in God's kingdom without order and organization. While it may seem to us, it may seem to us that sometimes there is no sense, and things aren't making sense to us, and maybe it does seem chaotic to us. But this is only an illusion, because God is behind the scenes as well. We don't always know what's going on. He sees the entire picture. We see this much. Also, God orders things according to his wisdom, not ours. In the arrangement of the tribes, he didn't place the largest tribes closest to the tabernacle, like bigger's always better. Ephraim, the closest westward tribe, was the third smallest tribe. Nor did he place all the large tribes on the outward perimeter for greatest protection, because that makes sense from a human standpoint. Benjamin, the second smallest tribe, is on the outer perimeter. God always has order and organization, but it may not make sense to us. So we don't know exactly why he ordered the things the way he ordered, but he did. Our resistance to another point is our resistance to God's order and organization is almost always the product of simple selfishness. We want to do things our own way instead of the Lord. For slaves, it's simple. Slaves are always told to do what to do and don't need to be ordered. And slaves are always told what to do and don't need to be ordered and organized. But free men must be taught order and organization and must submit to it. It kind of goes back to what I said last week about the whole process and procedures. We're not sheep. He's our good shepherd, but at the same time, we're more than sheep, because he just guides the sheep and they follow, and that's it. Whereas in our situation, he gives us orders and he gives us things to do, and we have a choice to obey them or not. Problem is if we don't obey it, then that's when we fall into problems. But when we do obey it, then that's when things work out well. There is a symmetry with all of this, and let's see. There's two possible designs here. Unfortunately, there's two possible designs here. And I've got one listed, and this kind of ties into what about the arrangement. But there is symmetry. Not 100% sure which way is correct. The one that I've shown here is a cross, and that could be a possible, that could certainly be a possible arrangement. The other possibility is that the arrangement could be a square, and I don't have that one posted up, but I do have this one posted up. And the square would look fairly similar to that. But either way, and interestingly, as far as an argument maybe that it's a square versus a cross, is that in Revelation, the New Jerusalem has dimensions that at least the base of it is a square. Now, it could be a cube, it could be a pyramid, but it does give the base of it being a square. And so that kind of harkens to that. The other possibility is that it is a cross. And so there are 4 points. You have north, south, east, and west. And either way, if one looks at the layout, the tribes are arranged in such a way so that there's balance. If you look at the north and the south, they take up 25 and 36% of the encampment. If you look at the 151,400 and the 157,600, if you take that total population together, that's 25% and 36%. That's about 51% of the population. The east and the west make up 18 and 31%. So about 49%. So basically, it's about a 50-50 split. It's very symmetrical in that case. And just from a mathematical standpoint, too, the north and the south make up the 25 and 36. I'm sorry, it's 61 and 49. I think I meant 25 and 26%. Sorry about that. 25% and 26%, which would make sense because they're both right around the same numbers. So I'm going to say 25 and 26%. So if you look at it in terms of north and south, and I'm going to go ahead and get on the whiteboard here. So let me just kind of make sure that I got the, if you look at the north and the south here, got north being 25%, and south, again, without checking my numbers, I'm just going to take a quick guess here. My typing said 36, but I think I meant 26. So then you look at the east is 18%, and the west is 31%. So this tallies up to be 51 total percent, and this tallies up to be 49 total percent. Okay, so so about split up evenly. And another thing I want to kind of mention is that, and this kind of hit me in mathematics, when you're talking about proportionality, there's something called the means and the extremes. If you have A over B is equal to C over D, which is a proportion like this. What we do is we call these the extremes and these the means. And the idea is that you've got the outer two things and the inner two things. And that's kind of what we have here numerically, is that we've got the extremes being the east and the west. 18%, the smallest percentage, and the largest percentage. And then we've got the means, the middle, because mean means average or middle ground. And so you've got the the means being 25 and 26. So one section of the cross, the east and the west, has the extremes and the other has the means. But when you look at them together, they're both pretty much the same thing. So like I said, I don't know if there's any significance to that. Probably not, but hey. So anyway, back to the diagram here now. All right. So the question is okay. What about the arrangement? And what about that arrangement? Let's see here. Sorry, let me get my notes. Yeah, we went through all of that. All right. And is there a point, kind of, we went through that there's a limit to what we can be and what we can do for the Lord without order and organization. We talked a little bit about that. Okay. The order of encampment, next question is there some sort of symbolism about the banners? This gets really kind of interesting. The banners that God tells them to be under, all right? When you've got Judah, and he bears the figure of a lion. And you've got Reuben, who bears the likeness of a man or a man's head. And then you have Ephraim, which is the figure of an ox, and Dan, which is a figure of an eagle. Okay, now if you look at the picture that I have right here, you've got the lion kind of hiding, and you got the man, and you have the eagle, and you have the ox. And who's this? Well, this is Christ, I believe. Or it could be, actually, you know what? Come to think of it, the basis of this might be John. And there's a reason for me saying that. I'm thinking it's John, and it has to do with the scroll here. All right. Anyway, there's a major significance in these banners. So you have the banners that God tells them to be under is a lion, a man, a calf, and an eagle. Okay. According to rabbinical tradition, the standard of Judah bore the figure of a lion, and Reuben, man, and Ephraim, the figure of an ox, and Dan, the figure of an eagle. There is some major significance in this. If you turn to Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 4 through 14, right? These four figures are mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1. Verse 4 says, I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like four living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had four faces and four wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had human hands. All four of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Here's the important part. Their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a human being, and on the right side of each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. And then it goes on a little bit more with some of the description of these entities. But again, what we have is these four faces. A human, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Right? Then, so that's the first significance. And then, so there's some symbolism there. All right. So, are these symbols prophetic because they're coming from Ezekiel? Yes, but they're prophetic not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament as well. Revelation 4, verses 6 through 8. My son is presently finishing up a class in Revelation, and he and his mother have had some interesting talks. I haven't had those discussions just yet, but I'm kind of curious to listen to them, or at least get a recap or talk about them sometime. But in chapter 4, verses 6 through 8, Revelation, also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were four living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second like an ox, the third had a face like a man, and the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the four living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. So in Ezekiel and in Revelation, if you compare the two, there are some small differences, such as 6 wings versus 4 wings, but they are very similar. So what do the symbols mean? Well, that's a good question. The 4 symbols can denote they also can denote, aside from just the some sort of prophetic thing, the 4 symbols with reference to the tribe of, or the if you go to Ezekiel, could mean with reference to those banners and kind of the symbolism of the Exodus and so forth. But also, as far as Revelation is concerned, that symbolism could mean the four Gospels. And what you have here with these creatures and this sort of image like this is, and actually this is. I really got to find the source of this again. And I apologize for not knowing whether this is Jesus or John, but here's why. Could be Jesus because it's the four gospels, because these represent the four gospels. That's what's called the tetramorph. Tetra standing for four, morph meaning figures. And it's these four weirdo figures kind of being associated together in one thing. That's why it's called, that's why this sort of artistry is called is what's called the tetramorph. And so if you're talking about the Gospels, all four Gospels, well, then this would be Jesus. But if you're talking about the four beasts that are mentioned in Revelation, and here's the scroll, well, that could be John. Again, I got to look at this. But other images, and I've got some different image in my notes. It's Christ who's in the center. So how on earth are these the four Gospels? Well, Matthew is represented as the winged man because his gospel begins with John the Baptist and his voice crying out in the wilderness. I'm sorry, got off of my notes here. Let's try that again. Matthew is represented as the winged man because his gospel begins with the human genealogy of Jesus. I read a sentence down here. Sorry about that. Mark is the one who's represented as a winged lion because his gospel begins with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is in the wilderness. And the lion in the Middle East is an animal who is out in the Middle East's wilderness. Right? So Mark is the lion, and Matthew is considered to be the man in this case. Now, as far as the ox is concerned, well, Luke is the winged ox of the tetramorph because his gospel begins in the temple of Zacharias. That's where all the sacrifice and so forth was going on. He's the father of John the Baptist. And an ox is a sacrificial animal, right? And then finally, John is the one who's represented as an eagle, because picture an eagle soaring over everything. And John's gospel begins with a soaring overview of the incarnation. In the beginning was the Word, right? So there's some symbolism for you. Could it mean something else? Could those four things mean something else? As a matter of fact, yes, they could. From a pagan viewpoint, this gets even more interesting here. If you look at those symbols from a pagan viewpoint, they're also in the areas as well. Ultimately, that whole concept, the tetramorph and stuff, is rooted in the Sumerian zodiac. The first written evidence about the science of the stars comes from Sumer. And the first constellations were probably defined no later than about 3200 BC when cities were being built, some of the first cities. And I guess this is a secular reference here from when the first cities were being built. Taurus is the bull, or in other words, the ox. Okay, Leo is the lion. Scorpius is the scorpion, and then Aquarius is the water carrier. Okay, so now you got Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Taurus the bull, in other words, the ox. Leo the lion. What about Scorpio? That's a scorpion, right? Well, kind of, sort of, yeah. But the eagle in astrology, and you can get into this if you want to, but in astrology, for whatever reason, the eagle serves as the astrological equivalent of the scorpion. Okay, so Scorpio, that's the eagle, right? And then lastly, you have Aquarius, who is a man, all right? Sounds like water, right? So you'd think something else, but it's Aquarius meaning which is a man. So what you have is the eagle, the lion, the bull, and the man. Okay, now these represent what they are is those four astrological signs, those constellations that were designated. They define the zones. They're kind of like representative of the middle month of all four seasons. What you have is you've got the bull, the ox, is in the summer. It's the middle month of the summer. He's the summer solstice. And then you've got Leo being autumn, and Scorpio. I'm sorry, I got this one off. Sorry about that. Let me try again. Boy, you've got the bull being the spring equinox, and the Leo being summer, and Scorpio, the eagle, being autumn, and Aquarius being winter. Those are your fixed signs of the zodiacs, right? In other words, the middle months of each season. So in other words, it's the complete cycle of the entire year and the 4 quarters of the earth, right? Also, those 4 astrological signs or constellations represent, again, this is in Sumerian and just in pagan type cultures, the 4 elements. Taurus represents earth, Leo represents fire, Scorpio, again, the eagle represents water, and Aquarius represents air, right? And then this actually comes from the class that my son took. I asked him what his professor thought about this, those 4 creatures in Revelation. And he kind of likens those 4 creatures: an eagle, a man, an ox, which is, pretty powerful creature, and a lion, to kind of represent sort of like the top of the food chain in each of their respective groups, if you will. So just a lot of symbolism there, both from a biblical standpoint, but those symbols also kind of carry on over into pagan symbolism as well. And how often do we see where one of the things that we see in other mythologies, there like 80, I think there's 80 plus mythologies of a great worldwide flood, and each of them having subtle differences. Well, is that not like Satan, where he takes the truth and twists it and bends it a little bit? So we have the biblical truth of Noah and the flood, but then all of these other tales are a little bit off and a little bit different, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of what you see here. Why 4? Is there a significance to the number 4? And the answer is yes, there is. 4 is considered in the Bible, is considered a symbol for completeness. In Genesis 2:10, you have the 4 rivers of paradise. In Ezekiel 37:9, you have the 4 winds of heaven. And the 4 corners of the earth are listed in Isaiah 11:12, right? And here's where it kind of gets cool. What was created on the 4th day of creation? This kind of links it back into sort of the pagan symbolism here, but God meant it for some for observation and to give him praise and worship. If you go to Genesis 1, chapter 1, verses 14 through 19. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark the sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. So on the 4th day, 4 symbolizing completeness, 4 talking about the 4 corners of the earth, 4 talking about, from a pagan standpoint, the 4 fixed signs, right? Up in the skies on the 4th day, that's when God created those signs for humanity. So a lot of significance as far as how God ordered them in chapter 2. So going back to the lesson, the original lesson, all the way back here, sorry, is that God is a God of order and preparation. We would do well to follow this order. So that concludes chapter 2. Next week will be the order of ministry. And this finally deals with, remember we said with Joseph, what happened to Joseph. And so we dealt with that his tribe was split up into 2 parts, into Ephraim and Manasseh. But with Levi, we said We said more on him later. And so that's later. And that'll be next week. So we'll talk about chapter 3 and 4, and that talks about just the marching out orders and Levi and all of that. So thank you for being part of this Bible study. And let me pray real quick here with everyone. Lord, thank you for this Bible study. I pray that if nothing else, maybe not a lot of application today, other than just that you are a God of order, but perhaps we see, though, that you're very purposeful. And even what looks like these banners and what each of these figures on these banners, that they actually have, they're not random. They actually have some real meaning, not only uh, not only in your Bible, considering prophecy and your Gospels, but also you reach out to everyone else that doesn't know you and your creation. This is where in Romans, where it talks about just creation gives you glory and points toward you. And here's just one more way where these constellations point toward your prophecies and the gospels and everything like that. It just kind of all sews together. It all points toward you and toward your son, Jesus, our Savior. We thank you for that, Lord. And help us just be on the lookout for such signs and wonders, just to give you praise and glory. And we thank you for that, Lord. And we look forward to coming back next week. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, everyone. Love you. And we will see you next week.